I am immensely delighted and pleased to introduce the speaker of this afternoon session, Professor Jivan Kumar. And I had the privilege of working with him on a confidential assignment in Bangalore University. Nice to meet you, Professor Jivan Kumar, after a very long time. I hope you can remember me, because I've changed a lot in terms of my physical, the size rather. So it's a pleasure to have you, Professor, with us. And Professor Jivan Kumar, he would be delivering a plenary session titled A Gandhian Alternative Vision of Sustainable Development. I'll take a few minutes to introduce Professor Jivan Kumar, a very distinguished academician, teacher, and a committed researcher. And I've just culled out some important things I want to share about Professor Jivan Kumar with you. Professor Jivan Kumar was associated with Bangalore University as a professor for a long time, and he was professor of political science in Bangalore University, and he attained superannuation in 2016. Apart from heading the political science department at Bangalore University, he has also served as the director of Dr. Ambedkar Study and Research Center in Bangalore University, the Center for Gandhian Studies, and Dean of Faculty of Arts of Bangalore Universities. His areas of specialization, it includes development politics and administration, Indian government and politics, and Gandhian studies. He was also a Fulbright Fellow in the United States of America in 2003, and a Fellow at the Salzburg Seminar in Austria in 1997. He was invited to deliver guest lectures at the United Nations University, Tokyo in 2007 and 2008, and also at the George Mason University, United States of America in 2011. He has presented papers at international seminars and conferences in the USA, Germany, Belgium, France, Japan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. He has also penned a lot of articles, and the books he has edited include The Angry Voter in 1995, Uniting in Responsibilities in a Culture of Rights in 2010, and The Excellence in Administration, Prospects and Perspectives in 2019. Currently, he is an honorary professor at the Karnataka State Rural Development and Panchayat Raj University, Gadag. He is also secretary of the Karnataka Regional Branch of the Indian Institute of Public Administration, Bangalore. He is also chairperson of Civic Bangalore. He is vice chairman, Sarvodaya International Trust, Karnataka Chapter, Bangalore, and member, Executive Committee, Gandhi Center for Science and Human Values, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Bangalore. This is just a brief introduction of Professor Jivan Kumar, and I'm honored and privileged to talk about you, sir, to the participants of this webinar. And I, once again, on behalf of the University of Mysore and behalf of the sponsors, the SIKI, New Delhi, as well as my colleagues of the university, I welcome you to this webinar, and I request you to deliver this afternoon's plenary session on a Gandhian alternative vision of sustainable development. Professor Jivan Kumar, please.
Okay, Vijay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to reconnect with you after a long time. And I'm grateful to you for thinking I would be able to make a good presentation at your one of your plenaries. So with that little, and thank you for the warm welcome and the introduction that you gave. Let me get down to brass tacks. This is the topic that I've chosen. Let me also compliment Vijay before beginning that this is a very contemporary and important webinar that the University of Mysore and Vijay Center for Gandhian Studies and the Department of English in collaboration with a few important organizations have put together because things keep changing. A lot of things keep changing around us. We are in the new millennium, already 21 years into the new millennium. And this question keeps popping up about Gandhi and the relevance of Gandhi. And therefore, I think at a very appropriate time, you're looking at this webinar, Gandhi and Thoughts in a Changing World. I've chosen to look at sustainable development and I'd like to make a PowerPoint presentation. Shall I blow it up, Vijay, so that the whole screen is covered?
Sure, yeah.
Just a minute, let me do that. Okay. So I guess all of you can see the screen. Let me give you the outline of my presentation. There are three important areas that I'd like to look at. For those of you who may not be very familiar with the term sustainable development, although I think that would be very unlikely, both sustainable development and more recently the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, have been in the popular discourse, contemporary popular discourse for quite some time now. And I'm sure all of you would be familiar with what is happening, but nonetheless, a brief introduction about the term sustainable development, how did it originate, and what actually does this term mean in terms of the authors of this particular concept. And then a little extension of the argument to look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because these goals are currently with us from 2016 onwards. The time frame given for the accomplishment of the SDGs is till 2030. And every 5 years or so, stock taking is being done to find out where countries are in terms of the realization of the SDGs. So I'll spend some time looking at this part of it in the beginning. And then I come to the second part of my framework, which attempts to answer two important questions, which I think are relevant not just from my presentation perspective, but also from the perspective of the theme of your webinar. And the first question, as you can see, is how would Gandhi describe the current model of development? So can we visualize Gandhi being with us today, Gandhi looking at what is happening in the name of development? And if Gandhi were to be with us today, how would he describe the current model of development? So I've tried to do some diagnosis, prognosis kind of work here. And then the second important question is, and that brings me directly to the thrust of my paper, would Gandhi have accepted and approved the Bruntland paradigm of sustainable development and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are currently being pursued? So two leading questions, and I have answers to these questions. I'm trying to put myself in Gandhi's large shoes, which is, of course, a very difficult task to do, and perhaps even a very arrogant thing to do. But nonetheless, since I claim to have done some work on Gandhi, perhaps I could try to do that. And therefore, in trying to answer both these questions, I'm trying to see how Gandhi, if he were to be with us today, how would he respond to these two big questions? And then I come to the third and the major part of my presentation, which is what the title of my paper is all about. How would a Gandhian alternative vision of sustainable development look like? So there are three areas, and given the time frame and the time at our disposal, I will not bore you with too many details, and I'm sure there would be time for questions. So I think I will take about half an hour at most, finish my presentation by 3 at the most, and leave time for discussion. I think 10 to 15 minutes time for discussion. Vijay, would that be enough? 10 to 15 minutes time based upon the questions that are...
Yes.
Okay.
15 minutes would be ideal for questions.
Okay, excellent. So I will take questions pertaining to what I have presented and respond to them to the best extent possible. This is my framework, my young friends. let me now begin with the first part of my framework. It's important for us to understand the origin of this term sustainable development. It's a rich term, it's a loaded term. It means quite a lot. It's important for us to understand what the terminology is all about. So I begin by stating the obvious, that this term sustainable development became prominent in discussions about environmental policy sometime during the mid-1980s. Before that, we did not really speak of sustainable development. The term itself had not become popular. We were talking about environmental consciousness. The Earth Summit had taken place earlier. The Earth Charter had been identified, and the need for trying to bring about a balance between environment and development had engaged the popular discourse at least 10 years before this term came into prominence. But nonetheless, it was in the mid-1980s when the United Nations appointed the WCED, the World Commission on Environment and Development, popularly called the Bruntland Commission because it was chaired by a very popular leader who still is very active in international organization circles, Mrs. Gro Harlem Brundtland. So since this lady was appointed the chairman of this WCED, World Commission on Environment and Development, after she was made the chairperson, this WCED came to be very popularly described as the Bruntland Commission. 5 years, this term, not 5 years, 2 to 3 years, this commission was in existence. And during the time this commission was active, they went around the world, they looked at major development projects. They tried to grasp what is actually happening with development, and all over the world. This commission was looking at particularly big development projects. And they realized that something seems to be wrong with the way in which development is happening around the world. And against that background, they came up with a very significant report. In 3 years, they were able to come out with a very important report, Our Common Future. I hope all of you are aware of this report. I hope it's there in the University of Mysore library. I'm sure it is. I would like those of you who are listening in and those of you who are concerned about environmental issues to take a look at this report. 87, it may seem like it's dated, but nonetheless, the report is very important because not only does it tell us what is sustainable development or what sustainable development is all about, it also gives us a lot of prescriptions, systemic prescriptions on what needs to be done to be able to do sustainable development, what kind of policies are needed to promote sustainable development. So from many systemic perspectives, you have a rich set of prescriptions which this report actually gives us. So it's important for us to be familiar with this WCED, the Bruntland Commission. It's more important for us to be familiar with the report which is called Our Common Future. And it's important for us to be also familiar with the Bruntland definition of sustainable development, because this definition has now become extremely famous. And this definition has also become very popular. And I am placing this definition before you, the famous and much popularized Bruntland definition of sustainable development, which is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this is also important. Just read this very carefully. It's a famous definition as I'm stating. It's a popular definition as I'm stating. And this definition of sustainable development seems to have become the basis for what we are going to look at presently. The United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are largely built around this definition of sustainable development. And therefore, I will read it out once again, because when we look at this definition from a Gandhian lens, from a Gandhian perspective, it appears that Gandhi would not have approved this definition, or Gandhi would not have approved the way in which the Bruntland Commission has gone about looking at sustainable development. Let's take a look at this definition first. And I'll repeat that: sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Seems quite all right to us, but it's very anthropocentric, as you can make out. The needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations. Very anthropocentric, looking largely at people. And one wonders whether the environment comes anywhere into what is actually happening. I'm sorry about the sound, but some work is going on at home. Let me just tell them to. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, nothing to worry, sir.
Some work is going on at home and I'm not able to.
Okay.
You'll have to put up, I think, I've told them to wait for a while, so hopefully there will not be any further disturbance.
Okay.
So, so getting back to my presentation, please look at this definition very carefully. It's famous, it's popular, everybody, most people seem to be quite satisfied with it, except for quite a large body of critics who have their own views on the subject, and Gandhi himself will get down to it presently. And as I'm stating in the second bullet point here, this Bruntland formulation of sustainable development has since then, 1987, come to represent mainstream thinking about the relationship between environment and development. So it's I won't say more about this definition. You will know presently what my own views are also once I present before you what Gandhi feels about it. But what exactly has the report done? Well, it has put development, which is a traditional economic and social goal. I mean, if you look at development itself, who among all of us would not want development? It's not only traditional, it continues to occupy our present discourse, economic development, social development, whatever kind of development we're looking at, but largely economic. I think we continue to pin a lot of faith on development because we feel that this is going to be the answer to all our problems. And countries like India, developing countries, seem to think, third world countries seem to think that catching up with the first world, catching up with the rest of the world, the developed world, is extremely important. So if development is a very important goal, well, obviously the environment would have to suffer somewhere or the other. And in this, what shall I say, the dichotomy between wanting to do development, particularly economic development, on the other side, trying to protect the environment, seems to be in a very difficult exercise for countries to do. And at a point of time when international conferences pointed this out and countries were told that you cannot compromise the environment in the name of achieving or doing development, the Bruntland report came at that particular point of time when it said both these things can be done simultaneously. That's very interesting, and therefore you please take a look at this also. It puts development and sustainability together. If you think, if one thing, development is largely an economic goal, sustainability is a different goal altogether. It's an ecological goal. How do you bring the two together? This Bruntland report, in its definition and in its prescriptions, seems to have done the impossible, which is putting both of these things together. So effectively, the Bruntland report is telling you development can be pursued, sustainability can also be pursued. You can do both together. And in a way, the Bruntland report came up with a new development model, and that is the model of sustainable development. So that's a brief story about the emergence of the concept of sustainable development. As I was saying, we need to locate it in the WCED report, Our Common Future, Bruntland Commission report, Our Common Future. And a major argument that the Common Future is making, the Bruntland report is making, that both of these can be done simultaneously. And I'll go back to the definition, which says as long as you are able to meet the needs of the present without compromising future ability of future generation, as long as you're able to do both, then nothing, no great damage would be done to the environment. You can continue to do development. Is it as simple as that? We will look at that. But before that, let me spend a few minutes looking at the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. This is much more recent than the Bruntland Commission report of the last century. Because the new millennium and the United Nations MDGs you're familiar with, Millennium Development Goals, 15 years. By the time the MDGs were, the countries were through with the MDGs, the United Nations said, I think we've got to take sustainable development as seriously as we took the MDGs. And therefore, there was a historic UN General Assembly Summit of September 2015, which formulated what we are currently engaged with doing, countries of the world, including state governments, pursuit of the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, this historic summit, September 2015, came up with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. All 193 member states of the United Nations, unanimously said, yes, it's important. Let's adopt all of them, so irrespective of countries, their regimes, kinds of regimes, and so on. And they all agreed that there is need for this agenda because we have been doing terrible things to our planet. Global warming, climate change are all very serious phenomena with which we've got to be concerned and be able to take suitable action to address those concerns, address those challenges. And so they all agreed and said that from 2016, let's bring into force the UN SDGs, 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So currently in 21, we are right in the midst of pursuit. Every country, governments, including state governments, are all very seriously pursuing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. What are the SDGs all about? They are a framework of 17 goals, 169 targets. I'm not going to bore you by repeating all those goals and 169 targets. You will have access to them if you just click on SDGs in the internet. But just in a sentence, if I'm to summarize what the SDGs are all about, they are a framework of as many as 17 goals. And under each goals, they have so many targets. You put all the targets together, you get as many as 169 targets. And these goals and targets are spread across social, economic, and environmental areas of sustainable development. All 193 member states have committed themselves to making the SDGs a reality by the year 2030. And you're familiar, I'm sure, with what Government of India is doing. You may also be familiar with what the Government of Karnataka is doing. I think just last month, the Government of Karnataka released a vision document pertaining to SDG implementation in Karnataka. The Planning Program Implementation and Statistics Department of the Government of Karnataka, they are in charge of ensuring that we are able, that in Karnataka, we're able to pursue the 17 goals seriously, as well as those 169 targets and some stock taking where we are going to be 5 years from now, and would we be on track in realizing all these goals and targets by 2030. Now, all these things are happening across the state governments, and I'm sure you're also aware of the fact that, that the Government of India has entrusted the Niti Aayog to be the nodal agency for monitoring what is happening both at the Government of India level and at the level of the various state governments as well as union territories. Let me give you one more slide about the SDGs. They are broad, they're interdependent. Each SDG, as I said earlier, has a list of targets. All the 169 targets the 17 SDGs are broken up into roughly 5 to 20 targets. About 10 on average targets for each of the 17 SDGs, and you have about 169 to 170 targets. There are indicators to measure progress, and in all there are 232 approved indicators to measure compliance. So therefore, you can't fool the United Nations, you can't fool Niti Aayog. You got to, when you submit reports, state governments submit reports to Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog has to be convinced that all these 232 approved indicators, we are complying with these 232 improved indicators, and Niti Aayog has come up with a variety of tools to track and monitor the progress towards these goals. So everything seems to be happening. We seem to be on track, and reports to the Niti Aayog reports to the United Nations. All these things keep coming up in the papers now and then. It appears that things are happening. It appears that we are on track. But then at a webinar like this, as I said, which is trying to look at Gandhi and his thoughts in a changing world, I think it's important that these two big questions are raised, and we proceed with how Gandhi would look at, for instance, the current model of development, and more importantly, how would Gandhi have responded to the Bruntland paradigm and definition of sustainable development and the United Nations SDGs, which are currently being pursued. So let me try to put myself into Gandhi's large shoes and answer initially question number one: how would Gandhi describe the current model of development? And there's a reference in the earlier plenary. Meena Pillai referred to Hind Swaraj of 1909. And as she said very rightly, it was first written in Gujarati, but we will not go into that. Of course, I don't know Gujarati, so I've not read the Gujarati version. I have a copy of the English version of Hind Swaraj, which was translated a little later. And I have a copy of Hind Swaraj incidentally in Gandhiji's own handwriting. You must try to get hold of it from the Jivan press in Ahmedabad. I visited Ahmedabad Jivan press at a point of time when they just released this collector's copy of Hind Swaraj, just for information of the Center for Gandhian Studies and for Vijay Seshadri. I managed to get hold of one of the collector's copies of Hind Swaraj. On the left side is Gandhi's handwriting, in Gandhi's own handwriting, which he wrote in his own hand, as you know, on board that ship when he was traveling from London to South Africa. On the left side is what Gandhi wrote in Gujarati. On the right side, you have a translation into both Hindi as well as into English. It's a very interesting copy, and I'm sure you probably library should be having that, or the Center for Gandhian Studies, University of Mysore may be having that. If not, you should try to get hold of this. Anyway, the Hind Swaraj of 1909 is important here because if you read this little booklet, you will find how seriously Gandhi critiques the model of development being pursued in the West. Look at the period, look at the time, 1909, more than a century ago, Gandhi was able to anticipate the fact that if the rest of the world pursued the model of development that was currently being pursued in the West, particularly in the UK, as you would all recollect, it was in the UK that the first industrial revolution actually took birth and then went to other parts of the West. And Gandhi, in his visits to London, both as a student and subsequently, was able to see at first hand this model of development and what would happen if the rest of the world were to follow suit. You may also be familiar with what Gandhi said a little later when somebody asked him, do you think after independence that India should follow the Western model of development? And his famous statement, God forbid that India take to this model of development and at a point of time when India's population was just about 300 million. At that point of time when Gandhi was asked, do you think India should copy this model of development after we become independent? And he said, God forbid India does that. And his subsequent statement, if indeed we do, then India, one country, would strip the world bare like locusts, was his answer to the question that somebody posed to him, what model of development should India follow? And behind that statement of his is a larger lesson for the rest of the world. Please don't follow the Western model of development because that would lead us to planetary ecological collapse. Okay, but nobody took Gandhi seriously, not even in India, the country where we revere him as the father of our nation. And therefore, this is the point I'm making here. If Gandhi were to be present today and describe the current model of development, I think he would be extremely unhappy because we have all we are all pursuing a model of development that is currently leading us to planetary ecological collapse. This is what we are seeing today. The pandemic, created some kind of a lull. But everybody is just waiting to get back to the old normal, and that's what we are seeing happening around us. A brief digression into what we are doing to ourselves. Almost 3 centuries of accelerating economic development have revolutionized science and technology. from the first industrial revolution, which I referred to a little while ago. We are now in the fourth industrial revolution, and the proponents of the fourth industrial revolution are proclaiming breathtaking possibilities. If you look at the kind of language that they're using, some of the appliances are already with us. These technologies are described as disruptive technologies, robotics, internet, nanotechnologies, genomics, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. Now all this seems to have become, practically commonplace, and we are, if you read the newspapers and magazines in the Western developed world, all these technologies have progressed so very fast, and already some of these have reached other parts of the world, including our part of the world. It appears to us that we have revolutionized not just civilization, we have revolutionized culture, we seem to have revolutionized human life itself. Okay, so how would Gandhi, I now come to the question I posed earlier, how would Gandhi describe this dominant model of development? Well, Gandhi may not have used the current terminology, but the implications are there in the writings of the past, 100 years ago and a little later. These terms that are put in italics do not figure in Gandhian literature. If you were to flip through the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, CWMG, you wouldn't find most of these terms or none of these terms. But then he anticipated the fact that this is what we are doing in the name of development. And therefore, to Gandhi, the current model of development, if Gandhi were to be with us today, he would use these terms. This model of development is ethnocentric, and this model of development is technocentric, is anthropocentric, it is materialistic, it is fiercely competitive, and it is insatiably consumptive. These are some of the terms which I think Gandhi would use if he were to be with us today. And the argument, if somebody says, but why is Gandhi being so critical of the current model of development? Well, Gandhi would put it in a very crisp fashion, because the current model of development worships mammon, the god of wealth, it worships capital. The current model of development believes in profit at any cost. So Gandhi would be most unhappy with the pursuit of the current model of development, all those industrial revolutions and all those so-called innovations that technologies have been able to bring to our doorstep and into our homes. Gandhi would just not be happy, and he would use all these terms which I put in italics here. Gandhi would not have been happy at all with the kind of development that we have been doing. And I quote one of my favorite quotes of Gandhi: an economics that inculcates mammon worship and enables the strong to amass wealth at the expense of the weak. That economics is a false science. That economics is a dismal science, because it spells death. And this is a quote from one of Gandhi's writings when he was asked questions about his views on economics and why he feels so strongly about economics and so on. He says, I'm nothing against economics, but this kind of economics that inculcates worship of the goddess of wealth is something that I simply would not accept. So this is how Gandhi would answer question number one. And let me come directly to what I'm looking at here. Would Gandhi have accepted and approved the Bruntland paradigm of sustainable development? Would Gandhi have approved the UN SDGs? And my answer, putting myself again in Gandhi's shoes, would be Gandhi would not have approved the Bruntland paradigm of sustainable development. He would not also have approved the way in which we are currently pursuing the UN SDGs. Why? Let me answer the question. Because this concept of sustainable development, which appears to provide the balance between economic development and environmental protection, because Gandhi would not approve of this, because this concept has been framed within, and I put that in italics, please note this, within the dominant ideology and model of development and within mainstream economic theory. So the Bruntland definition, the UN SDGs, looking at from a Gandhian lens, I think we have to accept the Gandhian argument that all of these have been framed within the dominant ideology and model of development and within the mainstream economic theory. And therefore, sustainable development is therefore essentially concerned with the sustainability of capitalist growth and profitability, and only subsequently with the sustainability of the ecosystem. This is how Gandhi would have responded to what is happening around us. the contradictory concepts of economic expansion, environmental protection, poverty reduction, free market. Now, all of these are important concepts today. We keep talking about that, and governments keep saying that they're going to do this and that and so on. All of these concepts, however contradictory they may seem, have all been merged into one awkward, unsustainable policy in the form of sustainable development. Gandhi's fundamental point is this: you can't do these two things simultaneously. You can't strive for maximization of capitalist profit and environmental protection simultaneously. You cannot do these, and Gandhi would have said these are two contradictory endeavors. Gandhi would therefore expect all of us, leaders, particularly leaders and policy framers, to do the following today: reject the dominant capitalist model of development, reject the economic model of growth and development, reject the consumptive model of development, understand the link between preservation of nature and survival of the planet, and last but not the least, complement the link between capitalist development, the development of underdevelopment, and structural and cultural violence. I don't have time to go into details because I said I will close by 3. And therefore, please, I'll run through this list once again. Gandhi today, if he were to be with us, would say, do these 5 things. Gandhi's panchil to the rest, to everybody in the world would be this, not only in our part of the world, everybody, all world leaders would be this panchil: reject the dominant capitalist model of development, reject the economic model of growth and development, reject the consumptive model of development, understand the link between preservation of nature and survival of the planet, and comprehend the link between capitalist development, development of underdevelopment, and structural and cultural violence. As I said, I'm not going into explanations because already I think I'm running short of time. I come now to the third and the most important part of my framework, where I'm saying, let's take a look at a Gandhian alternative vision of sustainable development. There is a Gandhian model, and this model is an alternative model of development. And if you look very carefully at this Gandhian alternative model of development, you will find that there are 3 very important characteristics, that make up this Gandhian alternative vision or the alternative model of sustainable development. There's no model as such, so some people have objected, some people have objected to the use of the word model, because model means that everything is in place and it should be easy to incorporate that into your policy framework and so on. And therefore, perhaps it's an alternative vision. We can take this up a little later. Is it a vision? Is it a model? Whatever. But then whatever the answer to that question is, 3 important characteristics figure as part of this alternative model / vision of Gandhi's. Number 1, ecologism. I'll explain each of these in the remaining slides. Second is justice. And what kind of justice? Social, economic, environmental. That is the kind of justice that Gandhi would privilege. And third, democracy. And as you know, today, democracy has become an extremely rich term. Democracy is a loaded term. But the kind of democracy that Gandhi would want all countries to pursue would be of the participatory kind, would be of the deliberative kind, and would also be of the decentralized kind. You will have another distinguished speaker speaking on decentralized governance and sustainable development. You have Professor Sudarshan Iyengar, who will be speaking on decentralized democracy, and I'm looking forward to listen to his views on the subject also. Let me spend a few minutes looking at each of these characteristics, which you find in the Gandhian vision of sustainable development. Ecologism would be very much present there. And in Gandhi's understanding of ecologism, you would find ecological wisdom, you would find ecological integrity, you would find respect for diversity, and if you're looking for specific Gandhian terminology, you would find a reference to ahimsa, you would find a link to Swadeshi, and many more. And in this context, what would Gandhi want us to do? Number 1, respect earth and life in all its diversity. Secondly, Gandhi would want us to care for the community of life. Understanding the web of life, as the term is used by ecological scientists, the web of life which connects all of us with each and every other species, billions of species on this planet, all interconnected. And if we think that we belong to superior species, we've got to care for the so-called lesser species. I don't like to use the word lesser species. I'm putting it with inverted commas. But if we think from an anthropocentric perspective that we are the most highly evolved and other species are lesser lesser creatures, well, we've got to look upon other creatures with understanding, with compassion, and with love. Gandhi would want us to secure Earth's resources and beauty for present and for future generations. Gandhi would want us to protect and restore the integrity of the Earth's ecological systems. Gandhi would want us to show special concern for biodiversity, as well as the natural processes that sustain life. And Gandhi would want us to prevent harm as the best method of environmental protection. And when knowledge is limited, Gandhi would expect us to follow the precautionary approach. So as far as ecologism is concerned, a few more points. Gandhi would want us to adopt patterns of production, consumption, and reproduction, which are prefixed with the word sustainability, that safeguard the Earth's regenerative capacities, human rights, community well-being. So Gandhi is not against production, not against consumption, not against reproduction, but he would prefix the word sustainable if before each of these terms that we are so familiar with these days. And then Gandhi would say, we need to advance the study of ecological sustainability and promote the open exchange, wide application of knowledge required. So if Gandhi were to be with us today, his vision of sustainable development would include very much the concept of ecologism, where you would find the terms I mentioned here, including Ahimsa Swadeshi and many more. The second one, social, economic, and environmental justice. Here, if you're looking for Gandhian terms, you would find trusteeship, you would find Sarvodaya, you would find Antyodaya. Again, I don't have time to go into these details, but keeping this in the background, Gandhi would want us to do the following. One, ensure that poverty is eradicated from the face of the globe, and take this up as an ethical, social, and environmental imperative. Ensure that economic activities and institutions at all levels promote human development in an equitable and in a sustainable fashion. Gandhi would emphasize gender equality, equity as prerequisites to sustainable development, ensure universal access to education, healthcare, economic opportunities, uphold the right of all without discrimination to natural, social environment, supportive, etc., etc. So all these things Gandhi would specifically bring into his vision of sustainable development, where I think social, economic, and environmental justice would figure very prominently. Then I come to the third and the last aspect, where Gandhi would believe in a kind of democracy, not the top-down model of democracy, not electoral democracy, not procedural democracy. Gandhi would believe in the term nowadays used is substantive democracy. Gandhi would believe in real democracy, substantive democracy. But if you want something more specific, I think these prefixes to democracy, Gandhi, which he spoke about so frequently, would add value to a Gandhian understanding of democracy. Democracy should be of the participatory kind. Democracy should be of the deliberative kind. Democracy should be of the decentralized kind. This brand of democracy, or these brands of democracy, is what Gandhi kept emphasizing during his lifetime, and which you would find in his concepts of Gram Swaraj, in his concept of Panchayati Raj, and many more of his concepts. So what would Gandhi want us to do? Build democratic societies that are just, participatory, sustainable, peaceful, strengthen grassroots institutions, Panchayat Raj institutions, strengthen the Gram Sabha that enable decisions to be made at the appropriate levels, right down to the lowest level, break down inequalities of wealth and power that inhibit democratic participation, strengthen all these institutions, provide transparency, accountability, and governance, inclusive participation, decision-making, access, universal access to justice, ensure that our elected representatives are not, one that once we elect them, that we go to sleep and let them do whatever they like for the next 5 years. We've got to track them. We've got to be behind them. Gandhi would expect that we track our elected representatives and ensure that they're committed to these principles, be it transparency, be it truthfulness, be it accountability. Okay, and Gandhi would also want us to promote a culture of tolerance, a culture of nonviolence, and a culture of peace. I finally come to my last slide, where I'm making this concluding observation. I'm stating here that the Gandhian alternative vision of sustainable development represents a crucial way forward today. So coming back to the theme of this today webinar, Gandhian thoughts in a changing world, I think sustainable development becomes very important for us to bring into Gandhian thoughts that are relevant today. And I think that when we bring in sustainable development, we should not go by the mainstream understanding of sustainable development. We've got to look at an alternative vision that Gandhi has written about may not all be very comprehensively presented before us, but we can attempt to do that. And we have to make this point that the Gandhian alternative vision of sustainable development represents a crucial way forward today. It advances a revised and reformed project of sustainable development. It's not that Gandhi would say, let's throw out the entire model, Bruntland definition model, and so on. He's saying we can take this terminology seriously, but can we revise sustainable development the way it has been understood? Can we reform the project? Can we reform the UN SDGs? I think Gandhi would say it's possible. And therefore, my last point, I'm stating that the Gandhian vision is simultaneously concerned with all these things, which I think every right-thinking person should be concerned with: well-being of everybody, equity, not just equality, and also ecological integrity. I think this is what I have been essentially trying to say. I've overshot the time I set for myself, but I think there should be time for discussion. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you, Vijay, once again for giving me this opportunity, and I look forward to questions. If there are things in the chat box, do I look at it myself or with somebody?
No, I will just give a quick recap to the participants, and then we can go on to the questions. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. Over to you. Back to you now. Back to you now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Jivan, for this wonderful talk on sustainable development. Here is a quick recap of what Professor Jivan has given to us through this slides. He has begun with the origin, growth, and the development of sustainable development. He has also touched upon what is development and what is sustainability, and how both should be going together. He has also discussed about the MDGs and SDGs and sustainable development vis-a-vis Gandhian thoughts today. And he has also raised crucial questions like how would Gandhi give his view on the Bruntland paradigm, and what would be the Gandhian paradigm for sustainable development today. And then the three major issues he discusses are on ecologism, justice, and democracy, where he's talking about social, economic, and environmental justice. And when it comes to democracy, he is discussing how democracy should be participatory, deliberative, and decentralized. And he concludes his PPT presentation by making a very valid point that Gandhian thoughts should find a way into sustainable development, and that's the crucial way forward for each one of us today in order to wade through life, or to feel what he said, the web of life. Thank you so much, Professor Jivan, for this wonderful talk. And let me share this with you, that I did contact Mr. Vivek Desai of Navjivan Trust. He is a managing trustee of Navjivan Trust. I called him, and in fact, I have met him and I have also talked to him. Unfortunately, he had a pressing engagement today and tomorrow. Otherwise, he would have been part of this webinar. So I would like to bring him some other time. So with these few words, I request the participants to ask your questions, make your observations, queries, whatever you want to ask. You can always ask Professor Jivan.
Thank you, Vijay. So I'm ready now. A couple of questions I noted in the chat box.
Yes.
Do I begin with them, or do I?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. So there is one question from Dr. Veena Ravindra, which says, would Gandhiji have approved of crores of rupees being spent on military for the security of a country? That's a good question. Definitely not. My immediate answer to that question would be Gandhi definitely would not have approved of spending so much of money on military security. Gandhi, with his belief in ahimsa, non-violence, and peaceful coexistence and so on, definitely would not have approved of what not just India, countries are doing, spending so much of money on acquiring arms, ammunition. The correct term to use is WMD, weapons of mass destruction. And if you track the nuclear weapons arms race, you'll be astonished at the amount of money that the nuclear weapon states are spending in order to promote or in order to secure what they feel is military security. It just doesn't work that way. Gandhi has written extensively on the subject. My quick answer to that would be Gandhi would not have approved. And if you're going to ask me a counter question, Dr. Veena, then what kind of security would Gandhi have spoken about? Well, again, to put myself in Gandhi's shoes, Gandhi would believe in the term human security very much. And the term human security is so rich today. Human security can be broken down into so many other kinds of security. Environmental security is part of human security. Food security is part of human security. The area is rich. I would request some of you are interested in knowing more about some of these terms. I've done some work, some writing on this. My email is given at the end of my presentation. Be in touch with me. I could connect you with people who have done work on this. And perhaps if you're serious, we can also put our heads together to think about how an alternative paradigm of human security would be much more meaningful than this endless or mindless quest for military security. It just doesn't work that way. There's another question. This was from, who was this? Cherry, I think, Mattam. Cherry Mattam says, how can we start to live in an alternative way so that it helps to nourish the earth? I mean, what are the first steps at the individual level? That's also a good question, Cherry Mattam. Thank you. I keep getting these questions because whenever people ask me what would I like to speak on, UGC, academic HRD centers and other places, I generally like to speak on sustainable development. And this is where I would draw your attention to the Earth Charter. I would draw your attention to even the document which has been, I said Gandhi would have critiqued, the document Our Common Future, published by the the Bruntland Commission itself. If you take a look at the Bruntland Commission report, Our Common Future, Cherry Mattam, you will find a long list of prescriptions given by them which are talking about how we can reduce the size of our carbon footprints, our ecological footprints. And it's done in a systemic fashion. It looks at various systems, looks at the economic system and says, what do we need to do to ensure that the economic system, produces more sustainability? It takes a look at the distribution system and says, how can the distribution system be more sustainable? It takes a look at the consumption system. You and I are part of the consumptive process. How can the consumptive system be made less consumptive? How do we reduce our consumption lifestyles and so on and so forth? So I would draw your attention, since I can't go into too many details, Cherry Mattam, I would draw your attention to several such documents. If you are in touch with me, I can also forward you. When young people ask, can you give us a list of what we need to do in our personal lifestyle? I say, I give you a 10-point charter, a 10-point list of do's and don'ts that each of us at individual levels can do to be able to lead sustainable lives. Just to give you one of those 10 points, you come across the 3 R's that environmental science has been speaking about. We've got to reduce, we've got to reuse, we've got to recycle. Okay, reduce, reuse, recycle, the 3 R's has now been added by a 4th R. And this, I think, is Gandhian, very much Gandhian, because they say reduce, reuse, recycle is okay, it's important. Individually, we've got to do all these things. But then are we forgetting the 4th R, which is called, what's the 4th R all about? We've got to rejuvenate. We've got to recharge. For example, we are constantly using water. What are we doing in order to recharge the water levels? Okay, so restoring the ecological balance. This is the 4th R, recharging groundwater, restoring the ecosystems that which we are constantly utilizing. So these 4 R's are very important. This is just one out of a series of steps that each one of us can do at an individual level to be able to ensure that we lead sustainable lives. The area is rich, and if you're able to search, you'll be able to find them. If you connect with me, me, I can put you in touch with organizations which are promoting sustainable lifestyles, both at individual and at community levels. There's so much we can do. The only the problem is that we should be convinced that this is the way in which we can reduce the size of an ecological footprint, our carbon footprints, and this is the only way in which we can ensure that the planetary ecological collapse, which is looming around the corner, because of climate change and other things, that we are able to ensure that these things do not happen, at least during our lifetime. So 2 questions I've taken up, Vijay. I don't see other questions. Would people want to unmute themselves? Okay, I've got a few other questions here. One second, let me respond to this. Padmaja Desai has a question. Yeah, I've got it open here. Padmaja Desai, in what way Gandhiji would develop the sustainable country like India? Some spelling problems are there. Okay, I think get this point. How would Gandhi promote sustainable development in India? I think that's the essential argument. Padmaja, that's exactly what I'm trying to say, be it a country like India or the rest of the world. Let's take a look at what needs to be done to promote sustainability. We have the SDGs before us, but as Gandhi would say, this is too dependent on the Western, the capitalist, the profit-oriented model of development. Gandhi would probably tell us, can we do things in a more sustainable fashion by moving away from this capitalist paradigm, which is so resource consumptive, which believes in endless production, endless distribution, endless consumption, endless profit. Gandhi would want us to take a step back, look at the kind of policies that we're formulating and say we need to reorient all the existing policies that we are doing and ensure that in each of our policies and programs that we prefix whatever we are doing with the term sustainability, and sustainability not in the way in which the West has understood it, but in the way in which Gandhi has helped us to understand. That would be an answer to Padmanji Desai's question. I think Pavan Kumar is another question, Vijay. What are my views on Gandhian model of sustainable development policy, whether implemented effectively? No, Pavan Kumar, I don't think we're doing it properly at all, because as I said, I'm firmly convinced that the entire world today has adopted and is operationalizing the capitalist model of development. Ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we have gone in for globalization in a big way, and I think the rest of the world, including the former socialist republics, are all pursuing reckless capitalism as the way in which development should be done. Gandhi would tell not only India, but tell the rest of the world, this is not the way in which we ought to pursue development. We've got to pursue development in a completely different fashion, and therefore, if you go back to my slides, I would request Vijay to share my slides with everybody. If you look at my slides, I am presenting what the Gandhian vision or the Gandhian model of sustainable development is all about. There, I've reduced it to 3 important characteristics. I didn't go into details. I didn't want to bore you with all those details. But if you get my PPT with you, my email is given at the end. Pavan Kumar, Veena Ravindra, and all of those who ask questions, please post an email to me. Tell me that you listen to me and this is what you would expect from me. I will flood you with material which will tell you what Gandhi believed in his model, how we can take it up seriously, and so on and so forth. So that is to Pavan Kumar. Do you think nuclear family, Cherry Mattam is another ball to bowl to me? Do you think nuclear family is bad for the environment when it comes to community living? You know, this whole concept of nuclear family is very modern, very contemporary. If Gandhi were to be asked, what do you think of nuclear family? I don't think he would approve at all. Because, his ashrams, take a look at his ashrams and take a look at the kind of community living in each of those ashrams, be it the Sabarmati ashram, be it the subsequent ashram that he established in Sevagram. I've been to all these ashrams. I've tried to visualize what kind of community living Gandhi believed in. I'm sure Gandhi would not have approved of nuclear families. Gandhi would say, let's make it an extended community family. Whether we are related to each other is not important, but let's live as a community, because community living through his ashrams, Gandhi has told us exactly how we can promote sustainability, how we can come to each other's assistance, and so on and so forth. Okay, so those are questions on the box, Vijay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll just find out if you have any more questions, you can always ask Professor Jivan Kumar. Participants.
ಪಾರ್ಟಿಸಿಪೆಂಟ್ಸ್
ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೂ ಕೇಳ್ಬೋದು, ಏನ್ ತೊಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಟೈಮ್ ಎಷ್ಟಿದೆ ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿ ವಿಜಯ್.
You have time, nothing to worry.
Yes, 50 minutes to you.
Okay, fine. So I'm also with you. 15 ನಿಮಿಷ ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು, ಏನ್ ತೊಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲ.
ನಮಸ್ತೆ.
ಸರ್
ಚಂದ್ರಕಿರಣ್ ಸರ್, ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಚಂದ್ರಕಿರಣ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿ.
ಕೇಳಿ
ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ. ಈ ಸಸ್ಟೈನಬಲ್ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗೆಗೆ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಳಕ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಸರ್. ತುಂಬಾ ಅರ್ಥಪೂರ್ಣವಾದ ವಿವರಣೆಯನ್ನ ನೀಡಿದ್ರಿ. ಸಸ್ಟೈನಬಲ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಬೆಳಸು, ಬಳಸು ಮತ್ತೆ ಉಳಿಸು. ನೀವು 17 ಗುರಿಗಳು, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಸಿದ 167 ಉಪಗುರಿಗಳು, ಏನ್ ಸಿದ್ಧಾಂತಗಳು ಇವೆಯೋ, ಇದನ್ನ ಬುದ್ಧ ಬಹಳ ಹಿಂದೆ ಮಧ್ಯಮ ಮಾರ್ಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ 3 ಸೂತ್ರಗಳನ್ನ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದ. ಬೆಳಸು, ಬಳಸು ಮತ್ತೆ ಉಳಿಸು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಇಡೀ ಸೂತ್ರ ಅದು ನಮ್ಮ ಈ ಸುಸ್ಥಿರ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿಯ ಒಂದು ಬದ್ಧತೆಗೆ ಅದು ಪೂರಕವಾಗಿ ಒಪ್ಪಿಗೆ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಅಂದ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ನಮ್ಮ ಆಧುನಿಕ ಸರ್ಕಾರಗಳು ಲಕ್ಷ ಕೋಟಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ವಾರ್ಷಿಕ ಬಜೆಟ್ಗಳನ್ನ ಮಂಡನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಯಾವ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಾದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ಈ ಸುಸ್ಥಿರ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿಯನ್ನ ನಾವು ಇದುವರೆಗೂ ಕಾಣ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗಿದೆಯಾ ಸರ್? ಆ ಕಾಣ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯವಾಗಿದ್ರೆ 2 ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ ಇದನ್ನು ತುಂಬಾ ಖಾರವಾಗಿ. ಒಂದು ವರ್ತಕ ಸಮುದಾಯ, ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ರಾಜಕಾರಣಿಗಳ ಸಮುದಾಯ. ಈ 2 ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳನ್ನು ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಇನ್ನು ಯಾವ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಾಗ್ಲಿ, ಯಾವ ಸಮುದಾಯದಲ್ಲಾಗ್ಲಿ ಇದುವರೆಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ಕೋಟ್ಯಾಂತರ ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಬಜೆಟ್ ಇವತ್ತಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದ ನಿನ್ನೆ ಪತ್ರಿಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೆ, 17 ನದಿಗಳು ಕಲುಷಿತಗೊಂಡಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಸರ್. ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದ 17 ನದಿಗಳು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಯಾವ ಸಸ್ಟೈನಬಲ್ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀವಿ? ಇವತ್ತಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ರೇಷನ್ನಿಗೆ ಕ್ಯೂ ನಿಲ್ತಾರೆ, ಹಸಿವಿನಿಂದ ಸಾಯ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಹಳ್ಳಿಗಳ ಕೆರೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನೀರಿಲ್ಲ ಇವತ್ತಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ. ನೀವು ರೀಚಾರ್ಜ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಿ. ಉತ್ತರ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲಿ 1000 ಅಡಿ ತೋಡಿದ್ರೂ ಬೂದಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಏನು ಕತೆ? ಯಾವ ಸುಸ್ಥಿರ? ಏನ್ ಕತೆ? ಇದನ್ನ ಗಾಂಧಿಯ ಚಿಂತನೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಅನ್ವಯಿಸೋದೇ ನನಗೆ ತಪ್ಪು ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. ಗಾಂಧಿ ಚಿಂತನೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಅನ್ವಯಿಸ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ನಾವು ನೈತಿಕವಾಗಿ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಆತ್ಮಹತ್ಯೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ.
ಹೇಳಿ ಸರ್.
ಉತ್ತರ ಕೊಡಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು. ನೀವು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದೀರಾ. ಮಧ್ಯ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಯು ಟುಕ್ ಅಸ್ ಬ್ಯಾಕ್ ಟು ದಿ ಮಿಡ್ಲ್ ಏಜಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಯು ಸ್ಪೋಕ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಅ ಫ್ಯೂ ಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ದಟ್ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಬಿನ್ ಟೇಕಿಂಗ್ ಸೀರಿಯಸ್ ನೋಟ್ಸ್. ಇದು ನೀವು ಹೇಳಿದೆಲ್ಲ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿದೆ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಇದು ಸುಸ್ಥಿರ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಮ್ಗೆ ವೆಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ದೇಶಗಳಿಂದ ಇರ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ಬ್ರಂಟ್ಲೆಂಡ್ ಕಮಿಷನ್ ನಮ್ಗೆ ನಿಜವಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ. ನಮ್ಮ ಇತಿಹಾಸಕ್ಕೆ ಹಿಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋದಾಗ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಜನ ಯಾವ ತರ ಇರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ನೀವೊಂದು ಮಾತನ್ನ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಹೇಳಿಲ್ಲ, ಆದ್ರೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ನಾನು ಇದನ್ನ ನೋಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಕೆರೆಯ ನೀರನ್ನ ಕೆರೆಗೆ ಚೆಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಪುರಂದರದಾಸನವರ ಇದು ಕೇಳಿದಿರಲ್ಲ, ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೇಳಿರ್ಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ಈ ತರ ನಾವು ನೋಡಿದಾಗ ಎಷ್ಟೊಂದು ವಿಸ್ಡಮ್ ಇತ್ತು, ಎಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಸುಸ್ಥಿರತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಏನ್ಷಿಯಂಟ್ ಪ್ರಾಚೀನ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇತ್ತು. ಆದ್ರೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಬರ್ತಾ ಆಧುನೀಕರಣದಿಂದ ಇವತ್ತು ನಾವು ಎಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ವಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನೀವು ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಂಧಿ ಎಷ್ಟರ ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತತೆ ಇದೆ, ಗಾಂಧಿನ ನಾವು ಬೇಡವಾ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಈ ತರ ನೀವು ತುಂಬಾ ನೋವಿಂದ ನೀವು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳನ್ನ ಎತ್ತಿದ್ದೀರಾ. ಐ ಅಗ್ರಿ ವಿತ್ ಯು ಲಾರ್ಜ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ ವಾಟ್ ಯು ಸೇ, ಬಟ್ ಐ ಡೋಂಟ್ ಥಿಂಕ್ ಐ ವುಡ್ ಅಗ್ರಿ ವಿತ್ ಯು ವೆನ್ ಯು ಸೇ ದಟ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ as hopeless as they seem to be. ಅಷ್ಟು ನಾನು ಡಿಸಪಾಯಿಂಟೆಡ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ಏನ್ ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಾ ಪೆಸಿಮಿಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಆಗಿ ಇರಲ್ಲ. ಈ ಯುವಕರಿಗೆ ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ಲಿ ಫಾರ್ ದ ಯಂಗ್ಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ನಾವು ಪಾಠ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರುವಾಗ ಇರ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಅವರು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ಲಿ, ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಒಂದು ದಾರಿ ತೋರಿಸ್ಬೇಕು, ಒಂದು ಮುನ್ನೋಟ ತೋರಿಸ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಜನರೇಷನ್ ಒಂದು ಕರ್ತವ್ಯ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಗಾಂಧಿ ಅಂತವ್ರನ್ನ ತರಲೇಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾಕಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಈಗ ಹವಾಮಾನ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಯಿಂದ, ಕ್ಲೈಮೇಟ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಇಂದ ಇರ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ಬೇರೆ ಕಾರಣಗಳಿಂದ ಇರಲಿ, ನಾವು ಇಷ್ಟೊಂದು ನಾಶ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ಪರಿಸರಕ್ಕೆ. ನೀವು ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಕೊಟ್ರಿ, ಗ್ರೌಂಡ್ ವಾಟರ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು. ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಯುವಕರ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಕೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು, ಸರ್ ಈ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿನಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಈಗ ನೀವು ಇವತ್ತು ಇರ್ತೀರ, ನಾಳೆ ನೀವು ಇರಲ್ಲ, ನಾವು ದೊಡ್ಡದಾಗಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ವಯಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಜೀವನ ಮಾಡಕ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಈ ತರ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳು ಅವರು ಎಕ್ಸಿಸ್ಟೆನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳು ಎತ್ತಿದಾಗ ನಾವು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ಬೇಕು, even now it is not too late. There is a vision, there are people, there is a culture, there is a system that we used to follow earlier. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಸೀರಿಯಸ್ ಆಗಿ ಗಮನ ಕೊಟ್ರೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಸರಿಪಡಿಸಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯವಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಪಿರಿಟ್ ಇಂದ ನಾನು ವಿಜಯ್ ಶೇಷಾದ್ರಿನ್ ಅವರ ಈ ಸೆಮಿನಾರು ಗಾಂಧಿಯನ್ ಥಾಟ್ಸ್ ಕಂಟೆಂಪರರಿ ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್ ಸ್ಪಿರಿಟ್ ಇಂದ ನಾನು ಈ ಟಾಪಿಕ್ ನಾನು ಎತ್ತಿದ್ದು. ಸೊ ಆ ಸ್ಪಿರಿಟ್ ಇಂದ ನಾನು ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ನಿಮ್ಗಿರ್ಲಿ ಬೇರೆಯವ್ರಿಗಿರ್ಲಿ ಏನ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಸ್ಟಿಲ್ ನಾಟ್ ಟು ಲೇಟ್ ಫಾರ್ ಅಸ್ ಟು ಮೆಂಡ್ ಅವರ್ ಫೆನ್ಸ್. ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಮಾಡ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ನೀವು ಮಾಡುದು ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸಬಾರದು. ಇನ್ ಅವರ್ ಓನ್ ಲೆವೆಲ್, ಇನ್ ಅವರ್ ಓನ್ ವೇಸ್, ವಿ ಮಸ್ಟ್ ಬಿ ಏಬಲ್ ಟು ಎನ್ಶೋರ್ ದಟ್ ಈಚ್ ಆಫ್ ಅಸ್ ಲೀಡ್ ಸಸ್ಟೈನಬಲ್ ಲೈಫ್ಸ್, ದಟ್ ವಿ ಪುಟ್ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಆನ್ ದಿ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಟು ಫಾರ್ಮುಲೇಟ್ ಪಾಲಿಸೀಸ್ ದಟ್ ಆರ್ ಸಸ್ಟೈನಬಲ್ ಇನ್ ನೇಚರ್. ಅವರು ಮಾಡದೇ ಇದ್ರೆ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಪ್ರೆಷರೈಸ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. ಗಾಂಧಿನವ್ರು democracy is meaningless if we cast our vote only once in so many years and then go back to sleep ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಗಾಂಧಿನೋ ಲಿಟ್ರೇಚರ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ಆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕು, ಡೆಮೋಕ್ರಸಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ವೈಬ್ರೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕು, ನೀವು ನಾವು ಎಸ್ಪೆಷಲಿ ಅಕಾಡೆಮಿಷಿಯನ್ಸ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಸೀರಿಯಸ್ ಆಗಿ ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನ ಪ್ರಚಾರ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಈ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ನಾನು ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ ಈ 2 day ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ ಇಂದ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಕೆಲವರಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ನಾವು ಈ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ನ ಕೊಟ್ರೆ, ಇಲ್ಲ ವಿ ವಿಲ್ ರಿನ್ಯೂ ಅವರ್ ಸೆಲ್ಸ್, ವಿ ವಿಲ್ ಟೇಕ್ ಇಟ್ ಸೀರಿಯಸ್ಲಿ. ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಗಾಂಧಿಯನ್ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್, ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಮೈಸೂರ್ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಟೇಕ್ ಇಟ್ ವೆರಿ ಸೀರಿಯಸ್ಲಿ. We will spread the message that sustainability is possible. ನೀವು ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಸೇರ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಒಂದು ಚಾರ್ಟರೇ ಬರೀಬಹುದು. ನಾನು ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕೂಡ ಒಂದು ಪುಸ್ತಕದ ಐ ಆಮ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಆನ್ ಅ book currently now which is called the Gandhian ಏನ್ ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಾ, ಐ ಆಮ್ ಕಾಲಿಂಗ್ ಇಟ್ ದ ಗಾಂಧಿಯನ್ ಟ್ಯಾಲಿಸ್ಮನ್ ಫಾರ್ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಟೈಟಲ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಸಾಧ್ಯ ನೀತಿ ಲೆವೆಲ್ ನ ಸರ್ಕಾರಗಳು ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು, ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನಾವು ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಒಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಪಟ್ಟಿನೇ ಮಾಡಿ ನಾನು ನಿಮ್ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಶೇರ್ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೂ ಕೂಡ ರೆಡಿ ಆಗಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಇದರ ಕೆಲಸಗಳನ್ನ ನಾವು ಆಪ್ಟಿಮಿಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಆಗಿ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯವಿದೆ ಅಂತ ತಗೊಂಡ್ರೆ we can go back to ancient literature, medieval literature, go back to Gandhi, go back to Purandaradasa and take inspiration from all these words and all their slogans and their visions and ensure that we are able to lead sustainable lives to the best extent possible. Okay, thank you.
Okay, sir, thank you. Any question from participants?
Are there any more questions?
Participants?
ಅವರು ಕೈ ಎತ್ತಿದ್ರು, ನನ್ಗೆ ಇವಾಗ ಕಾಣಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ.
ಇಲ್ಲ, ನಂದೇ ಇರ್ಬೋದು ಸರ್, ಕೈ ನಂದೇ ಇರ್ಬೋದು. ನಂದೆ.
Okay, fine.
Okay, thank you,
Professor
Jivan. It was wonderful listening to you, and I'm sure the participants would have been immensely benefited by your talk. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you so much.
Connect with you.
ಸರ್ ಬಂದಿದೆ, ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಣ.
ಇದು ಟೀ ಬಂದಿದೆ ಕೇಳಿ.
ಬಂದಿಲ್ಲ ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಣ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ರೆಡಿ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅವರು ಮಿಸ್ಟರ್.
ಬಂದಿಲ್ವಾ? ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಹಂಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲೇ ಕೊಟ್ಕೊಂಡ್ಬಿಡೋಣ ಬಿಡಿ. ಓಕೆ,
ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಣ.
ಒಂದು ನಿಮಿಷ ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ನೀವು ಹೇಳಿ.
ಓಕೆ.
ಇದು ಕೊಡಿ. ಓಕೆ. Well, we are now going to move to the last session of the day. This is by a very distinguished speaker, Professor H.M. Rudraswamy. He is a senior progressive thinker from Chikmagalur, Karnataka. And I welcome you, sir, to this afternoon session. And I request my friend and colleague, Professor Shekhar, Director of the Center for Gandhian Studies, to introduce Professor Rudraswamy to the participants. Professor Shekhar.
Gandhi and his thoughts in a changing world. ಈ 2 ದಿನದ 2 days ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ಗೆ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ರುದ್ರಸ್ವಾಮಿ ಸರ್ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಆತ್ಮೀಯವಾಗಿ ನಾನು ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ H.M. Rudraswamy is a senior progressive thinker with a keen sense of perceptions of life and the world. He is an integral part of all the progressive movements in Karnataka. By profession, he was a professor of sociology. Professor H.M. Rudraswamy was my teacher in the UG class at Asan during 1985. He is very much influenced by the thinking and the ideas of Buddha, Basava, Ambedkar, Gandhi, Periyar, Ramanohar Lohia, Narayan Guru, Kudumal Rangarayuru, and Kuvempu. He is a humanist in his deeds, words, and actions. He has original insights and thoughts about Gandhi, the man, and his works. Today, he will be delivering a plenary talk to us about Gandhi methods to fight social evils. I welcome Professor H.M. Rudraswamy sir to deliver his plenary address. Welcome, sir.
ಸರ್ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಇದನ್ನ ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ಸರ್.
ಸರ್ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ. ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ
ಸರ್? ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಸರ್. ನಿಮ್ಮ ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಅಂತ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಸರ್.
ನಾ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ ಕೇಳಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರಿಗೀಗ.
ಅವರು ಕೇಳಿದೆ ಸರ್.
ಕೇಳಲ್ಲ, ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಾ?
ಇದಾರೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಹಾ, ಈಗ ಬಂತು ಸರ್. ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಸರ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿ. ನಾವು ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ ಕೇಳ್ತಪ್ಪ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ.
ಸರ್ ನಾವು ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ ಕೇಳ್ತು ಸರ್, ಅವ್ರು ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಸರ್. ನಿಮ್ದು ಆಡಿಯೋ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ಸರ್.
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೀನಿ.
ದೇವನಂದ್
ಸರ್
ಅವ್ರು ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು
ಸರ್? ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಪಕ್ಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದಾರೆ ಸರ್, ಹುಡುಗ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡಿ
ಸರ್, ಅದು ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು. ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ನಮಗೆ.
ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು.
ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕು. ದೇವನಂದ್
ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಮಾತಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಹೇಳಿ ಮೇಸ್ಟ್ರಿಗೆ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಡಿ.
ಕನೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಸರಿ ಇದೆ ನೋಡಿ
ಸರ್ ನಿಮ್ದು ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ಸರ್. ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ಲಿ ಕೇಬಲ್ಸ್ ಏನೋ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಇದೆ ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ ನೋಡಿ ಸರ್. ನೀವು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟರ್ನಲ್ ಕೇಬಲ್ ಹಾಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀರಲ್ಲ ಸರ್. ನೀವು ಮಾತಾಡೋದು ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸರ್. ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದೀರಾ? ಸರ್ ನೀವು ಕೇಬಲ್ ನ ತೆಗೆದೇ ಬಿಡಿ ಸರ್. ಅದು ಹಾಕಿದಿರಲ್ಲ ಅದನ್ನ ತೆಗೆದ್ಬಿಡಿ. ಹಂಗೆ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಮಾತಾಡಿ. ತೆಗೆದ್ರೆ ಈಗ ಮಾತಾಡಕ್ ಹೇಳಿ ಸರ್. ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಸರ್ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಸರ್.
ಈಗ ನಾವು ಮಾತಾಡಿದವ್ರು ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ಲಿ
ಸರ್. ನಾವು ಮಾತಾಡಿರೋದು ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಸರ್.
ಅದು ನಿಮಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತದ? ಅಲ್ಲ, ರೆಸ್ಪಾನ್ಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲಲ್ಲ
ಸರ್. ಇನ್ನೊಂದ್ಸಲಿ ನೀವು ಲಾಗೌಟ್ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಲಾಗಿನ್ ಆಗ್ತೀರಾ? ಝೂಮ್ ಮೀಟಿಂಗ್ ಲಾಗೌಟ್ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಲಾಗಿನ್ ಆಗಿ.
ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಡಿ. ನಾವು ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಕೇಳ್ತಾನೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ
ಹೇಳಿದೆ. ಅವ್ರು ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರು ಮ್ಯೂಟ್
ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡಿ ದೇವನಂದ್.
ಸರ್ ನಿಮ್ದು ಆಡಿಯೋ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ಸರ್. ಆಡಿಯೋ ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ಸರ್. ಒಂದ್ ನಿಮಿಷ ಆಗ ಇಟ್ಕೊಡಿ. ಸರ್ ಈಗ ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. ಫೋನ್ ಆಫ್ ಆಯ್ತು.
ನಾನೇ ಸರಿ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು.
ಸರ್ ನಾವು ಮಾತಾಡೋದು ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ?
ಬೊಗ್ಗದೇಲಿ ಯಾರಿಗೂ ನೋಡ್ದ ಒಂದು ಸುಬ್ಬ.
ಸರ್ ನೀವು ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಇಂದಾನೆ ಲಾಗಿನ್ ಆಗ್ಬಿಡಿ ಸರ್. ಸರ್ ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಇಂದಾನೆ ಲಾಗಿನ್ ಆಗ್ಬಿಡಿ ಸರ್. ಯಾವ ಹೆಸರಲ್ಲಿ ಲಾಗಿನ್ ಆಗ್ತೀರಾ ನನಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಇಂದಾನೆ ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ ಸರ್. ಅವ್ರ ಫೇಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಣ್ಲಿ, ಆಡಿಯೋನ ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಇಂದ ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಡಿ, ಆಡಿಯೋ ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಇಂದ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ನಾನು ಅದನ್ನ ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಯಾವ ನೇಮ್ ಇಂದ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನನಗೆ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ರೈಸ್ ಮಾಡೋರಾಯ್ತು.
ಕೊಡಿ.
ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಮಾಡ್ಲಾ? ನಾನು ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ. ನಾನು ಮಾಡ್ಲಾ? ನಮ್ಮ ಮನೆಯವ್ರ ಕಂಡ್ರಿ ಅದು. ಹಲೋ, ಅವ್ರು ಕಳಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ರೀ, ಕಳಿಸ್ತೀನಿ. ಹಲೋ
ಸರ್, ಯಾವ ನೇಮಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಲಾಗಿನ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದೀರಾ ಸರ್? ನೀವು ಟೈಪ್ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕಾಗುತ್ತಾ
ಇದು
ಚಾಟ್ ಬಾಕ್ಸ್ಗೆ?
ಪ್ರತಾಪ್ ಹೋಗಿ ಕೇಳೋದು
ಸರ್, ಚಾಟ್ ಬಾಕ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಇದು ಮಾಡಕ್ಕಾಗತ್ತಾ?
ಇಲ್ಲ ಇರ್ತದೆ.
ಹಾ ಸರ್, ಈಗ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ನಿಮ್ದು?
ಹಾ, ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಕೇಳಿ. ಪ್ರತ್ ಹೋಗಪ್ಪ ಮಹಾರಾಜ ಕಾಲೇಜ್ ನಂಬರ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಮನೆಯವ್ರದ್ದು. 9480 4383 90. ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ ಕಾಲೇಜಲ್ಲಿ. 9480 ಅದೇ ಒಬ್ರು ದಂಡಿಗೆ ಸರ್ ಆಯ್ತು ದೇವನ
ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ ಸರ್. ಹಾ ಸರ್, ನೀವು ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಆಡಿಯೋ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್. ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಸರ್, ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಸರ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿ.
ಹಲೋ,
ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ನೀವೇನು ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಕೆನ್ನೆ ಹತ್ರ ಇಟ್ಕೋಬೇಡಿ ಸರ್, ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ನ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಇಟ್ಬಿಡಿ ಸರ್. ನೀವು ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ನ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಇಟ್ಬಿಡಿ ಸರ್. ನೀವು ಹಂಗೆ
ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್, ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದೆ.
ನೀವು ಕಿವಿಗೆ ಹಾಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ಸರ್,
ಅವ್ರು ಸರ್ ಕಿವಿಗೆ ಹಾಕೊಳ್ಳಿ.
ಇಯರ್ಫೋನ್ ಕಿವಿಗೆ ಹಾಕೊಂಡು ನೀವು ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ ಹಾಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕು
ಸರ್. ಈಗ ಒಂದೇನಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ ಫೇಸ್ ಕಾಣುತ್ತೆ, ನೀವು ಮಾತಾಡೋದು ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಇಂದ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀರಾ.
ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಸರ್?
ಸರ್ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದೆ.
ಹಲೋ
ಸರ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿ. ಸರ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿ. ಹೌದಾ, ಈಗ ಕೇಳ್ತಿರೋ ದೇವನ್
ಸರ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿ. ಸರ್ ರಾಮನ್ ಅಂತ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀರಲ್ಲ ಸರ್, ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಸರ್ ಅದನ್ನ.
ಅವ್ರ ಮಗ ನಂಬರ್ ಕೊಡ್ಲಪ್ಪ
ಸರ್, ಅವರೇ ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಸರ್. ಅದು ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್. ಈಗ
ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದಾರ?
ಸರ್ ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ಸರ್. ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಸರ್.
ಇವತ್ತಿಗೇನೆ ಅದು ಇಬ್ರು ಹಾಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ
ಸರ್. ನೀವು ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸೌಂಡ್ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕಾಗುತ್ತಾ? ಆಡಿಯೋ
ಇಬ್ರು ಸೇರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಯಾರ್ಯಾರು ಬೇಕು ಒಟ್ಟಿಗೆ
ಸರ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಈಗ. ಸರ್ ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ, ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಇಬ್ರು ಮಾತಾಡ್ದಂಗೆ ವಿಜಯ್ ಶೇಷರ್ ಎರಡು ಸೇರ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ನಿಮ್ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ
ಹಾ ಸರ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್. ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಬರ್ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಡಿ. ಇವ್ರದ್ದು
ಸರ್ ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಲಾಗೌಟ್ ಆಯ್ತು ಸರ್. ಸರ್ ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಲಾಗೌಟ್ ಆಗೋಯ್ತು ಸರ್. ಸರ್ ಇನ್ನೊಂದ್ಸತಿ ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ಗೆ ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಸರ್ ನೋಡೋಣ. ಸರ್ ಇನ್ನೊಂದ್ಸಲಿ ಆ ಕೇಬಲ್ ನ ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ಗೆ ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಸರ್, ಹೆಡ್ಫೋನ್.
ಸರ್ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಷ್ಟ ಸುಖ ಬಯಸಿದ್ರೆ ಬಂದೋಗಿ ಸರ್ ಅಂತೆ. ಅದ್ರ ಅವ್ರು ಕೊರೋನಾ ಅಂತ ಎದುರ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಯ್ತು ಕಡೆ. ಅಲ್ಲ ಮೇಸ್ಟ್ ಅಂತ ಕಾಣಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರು, ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಬೆಳ್ಳಗಾಗವ್ರೆ. ಲೀವ್ ಅದು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಹೊಡಿತಾರೆ.
ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಆಡಿಯೋ ಔಟ್ ಅಂತ ಬರುತ್ತಲ್ಲ ಸರ್, ಅದನ್ನ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ನೋಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡಿ
ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮಾಡ್ಲಾ?
ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮಾಡಿ
ಕೇಳಪ್ಪ, ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೊಡು.
ಸರ್ ಏನಿದೆ ಸರ್, ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ಯಾವ ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ಸರ್ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ನೀವು? ಲೆನೋವೋ ಅಲ್ಲ ಸರ್, ಲೆನೋವೋ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಲೆನೋವೋದಲ್ಲಿ ಈಗ ಆಡಿಯೋಗೆ 2 ಪಿನ್ ಇದೆಯೋ 1 ಪಿನ್ ಇದೆಯೋ ಸರ್? ಲೆನೋವೋ ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ಸಿಂಗಲ್ ಪಿನ್ ಅಲ್ಲ ಸರ್. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಹಾಕಿದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸೈಡ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಆಡಿಯೋದು ಇದು ಬಂದಾಗ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಡ್ಫೋನ್ ಅಂತ ಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಸರ್.
ರೆಡಿ ಮಾಡಿದೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ಸಾಕಂತ. ಇದು ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಇತ್ತು, ಇದು ಸಾಕು. ಇದು ಇದಕ್ಕ ಸಾಕಿಷ್ಟು ರೆಡಿ ಇದೆಯಾ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಅರ್ಜೆಂಟ್ ಇದು. ಒಂಚೂರು ನೋಡಿ ಕಳ್ಸೋದು ಒಳ್ಳೇದು ಅಂತ. ಉಮೇಶ್ ಉಮೇಶ್ ಒಂಚೂರು ನೋಡಿ. ಉಮೇಶ್ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಇದೊಂಚೂರು ಅರ್ಜೆಂಟ್ ಮುಗಿಸ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಏನು ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ಪ?
ಮೊಬೈಲಿಂದ ಟ್ರೈ ಮಾಡಿ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮೊಬೈಲ್
ಕೊಡಿ. ಉಮೇಶ್ ನೋಡ್ಬಿಡಿ, ಹೊರಗೆ ರೆಡಿ ಮಾಡೋರು ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿ ಹಾಳು ಮಾಡೋದಿದೆಯಾ ವಿಷಯ ಮಾತಾಡ.
ಸರ್ ಪ್ರಸನ್ನ ಅಂತ ಲಾಗಿನ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದೀರಾ ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ.
ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ? ಹಲೋ,
ಅವ್ರೇನಾ? ಅವ್ರೇನ್ರಿ?
ಸರ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್, ಈಗ ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್, ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಮಾತಾಡಿ.
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ?
ಬಂದು ಪ್ರಸನ್ನ ಬಂದು. ಈ ಪ್ರತಾಪ್
ಸರ್,
ಪ್ರತಾಪ್ ಬಂದ್ರು.
ಈಗ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಸರ್?
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್. ಫೈನ್ ಸರ್, ಇವಾಗ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಮಾತಾಡಿ.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸರ್.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸರ್.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸರ್. Sir, Gandhiji is the great Indian leader of 20th century. It is observed that he is the conscious keeper of humanity. It is a matter of pleasure to speak on Gandhi and his historic struggle against the social evils of India in the time of freedom movement. According to my observation, the Indian freedom movement was not only a struggle against the colonial rule, but also it was a great social reform movement of India. Nearly 80 years back, Mahatma Gandhiji recognized the social evils of India, that too particularly the caste discrimination and untouchability. Gandhiji is probably the great Indian leader who clearly understands the dimensions of the social change in India. Means unless the change was able to keep the rural population, no change will be made in the system. In the Gandhi's life, his struggle against the racism in South Africa was the greatest event which made him the Mahatma. The racism is even today the major problem of the humanity. In spite of the advancement in science and technology, the racism is still existed in the different parts of the world, that too particularly in the liberal country like America. The many incidents are reported. In order to fight the racial prejudice, the Gandhian method of passive resistance and non-violence is the only available method. After Gandhi comes to India, he experimented the South African success in India in a greater manner. Racism is the greatest and oldest social evil of the world. Even today, in the modern world, the people are suffering with the stigma of racism. After racism, especially it refers to the India, the caste discrimination is the major socio-economic problem. In spite of the many changes which is going on in this country, the caste prejudices are still dominated in a larger extent. In addition to the caste discrimination, the stigma of untouchability is still living. It is very delicate and strong. Even today, the many incidents are reporting from the different parts of the country. The stigma of untouchability is even today the most serious social evil of the present contemporary India. According to Ambedkar, the caste is like in an ascending order of reverence and a descending order of contempt. According to M.N. Srinivas, the distinguished socialist of the country, he observed that the occupational purity and impurity, the attitude towards this psychological things is the root cause for the existence of the stigma of untouchability even today in different parts of the country. Even today in the rural area, the Dalit exploitation, the atrocities on them, their women are raped, their leaders are related, their property is destroyed. These ugly incidents are reporting from the different parts of the country. In order to fight against the stigma of untouchability, it is very necessary to understand the Gandhian thought and to apply it in the struggle against the stigma of untouchability. The population of the untouchables are very large. The 1/3 of the population of present India or consists of these depressed communities. Even from centuries together, many social reform movements have made an attempt to eradicate this stigma, but even today, this problem is not eradicated. Even in the days of freedom movement, Gandhiji made an attempt for the anti-untouchability propaganda, for the changes of psychological attitudes of the common man in India in a larger extent. There was a conflict between Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, the another great social reformer of India, and Gandhiji. Gandhiji and Ambedkar may be different in their approach, but they are committed for the social transformation of India. That too, the discrimination between the man and man must be eradicated at the earliest stage. That is why in the Indian Constitution, in many reformative measures and legislations have been passed and incorporated into the Constitution of our country. But in letter and spirit, it has not been materialized. Gandhi's attempts and Gandhi's thoughts are even today relevant for the suppressed communities to unite and fight for their justice in a non-violent manner. Or otherwise, it is very difficult for them to fight the mighty social organization. Many religious reformers may have written in the 20th century, but unfortunately, in the recent days, no other Indian religious leaders are making any sincere attempt for the eradication of the social disparities, that too particularly the stigma of untouchability has become a major problem. The laws it may be constitutionally abolished, but in practice, in different form, the system is even today existing. In spite of the safeguards in the Constitution and the other legislative methods by the different states, this problem is still living in the rural parts of our country in one way or the other. The bad incidents, the cruel accidents, and other form of inhuman incidents are going today, even today. Even in the urban area, the stigma of untouchability, like the color prejudice, a psychological crisis is even today existing. This problem has to be addressed by the ruling class from the state and the society. But unfortunately, in spite of the radical economic advancement, in spite of the many political changes, the social reformation is not going on in an expected manner in the 20th century and the present 21st century. No other political leaders, no other responsible religious leaders are not following the Gandhian methods to fight this evil. So it is the urgent necessary to understand the relevance of Gandhi's method, to change the socio-moral degradation of the society, because in the fight against the Britishers, the whole nation will stand united. But in the struggle for social justice, in the struggle for social equality, the people will be divided on the caste line. It's an irony of the socio-economic condition of our society. This problem is not addressed properly in the recent days. Many social legislations have been passed, many safeguards have been made. Still, the fundamental civil rights are not provided to this unfortunate, historically exploited section of our society. Therefore, I believe that in the light of my little knowledge on Gandhi and Ambedkar, the Gandhian method is the only solution to fight against the social ills like untouchability and the caste discrimination. It's a psychological problem. It's not an economic and political problem, but this has to be addressed religiously, and psychological education and psychological, mental slavery must be addressed. We have to educate the people by radical learning and others. Even from the days of Buddha, for the liberation of this exploited section is going on. It was very active in the time of freedom movement because of Ambedkar and his struggle for its own people. But still this problem is hunting the millions of people. The dignity of people is marginalized. The fundamental civil rights are not given. Even today, the many untouchables are not allowed to enter their homes, their temples, and other important religious and spiritual places. It is very delicately and deliberately practiced. But the conscience of the society is not open, and this problem is not there in their agenda for the reformation methods. In India, the social reformation history has long tradition, but there is only a few persons to support social reformation. The critics are more. The problem of untouchability is very, very easy to practice, but very intolerable for the experience of the people. That is why, in order to uphold the human dignity and the integrity of the country, it is the urgent necessity to address this social evil, the ancient social evil. It is there even in the modern time in a different form, and it is the responsibility of the state and the society to address this problem as early as possible, without which in the world of civilization, the country will not reach the road place. The another important social evil where the Gandhian methods are very useful is the exploitation of the child labor. Even today, because of the poverty and ignorance, the rural child labor problem is still existed. They have been exploited economically in small industries and the other places. The children are exploited, abused, and tortured. This is a heinous social evil which has been neglected by the administration of our society. That is why, to fight against this social evil, it is necessary to understand the Gandhian thoughts and their applications in a systematic, up-to-date manner. The another important social evil which hunts the nation even today is the gender inequality. Gender inequality is another crisis in the world facing, but in India, it's very strong. Traditionally, the woman has been degraded less than Sudras in their status and other things. Even the modern education, the constitutional protections and other things are not in a position to create a justiciable equality between the male and the female. Many opportunities are curtailed. Even though the literacy rate of women is increased in a reasonable manner, still the atrocities on them, physically and mentally, is not eradicated. Gandhi struggled hard for the education of the woman, even in the times of the movement. That's why, for the gender equality between the male and the female, it is traditionally a male-dominated society. The upper caste landlord communities in the rural area and the capitalists in the urban area are exploiting the women in a larger extent. That is why, to struggle against this age-old psychological and the social evil, the Gandhian method of non-violence and the passive resistance and awakening the mass psychology against this system is very useful. In order to these age-old social, in addition to these social evils, the superstitions are very strong in India. The customs and traditions, age-old traditions are not eradicated. are not diminished, even in spite of the modern education in this country. The many superstitious practices like the child marriage and the Devadasi system still exists in many parts of our country. In Maharashtra, in Andhra Pradesh, in Karnataka, the scheduled caste women, the upper caste landlords are exploiting in the name of the religion. It has been abolished in the laws, but in spirit and practice, the system is even today existing. In the name of the religion, in the name of the traditions and customs which are more powerful than the modern laws, are still responsible for the innumerable types of exploitation of human flow in rural India. It is as ugly as the stigma of untouchability. They have been economically and socially depressed, even in spite of the literacy rate is increased. Even today, many practices are very serious in nature. The Gandhiji's attempt to eradicate these evils are exemplary. We have to study them properly. There are many modern problems and socio-economic evils are rising their ugly head. Even in spite of the economical advancement and revolution, the social and cultural attitudes are not changing. The ancient mental attitude is there even today existed among the many people, majority of the people of the country. Even the political system is dominated by the male people, and the upper strata of the society is enjoying the fruits of democracy and other advancements. The fruits of democracy and the other advancements have not reached in a decentralized manner to the lower strata of our society. Therefore, even today, the Gandhiji's historic attempts, Gandhiji's rare experimentation of truth and nonviolence and passive resistance is the only way to fight against all other social evils. Or otherwise, it is very difficult to face the state power because their organized state power and the police cannot be faced by the harmless people. The violence may be destructive to the social reformation. Any social reform movements must be spiritual in nature and it should be morally awakening people to understand their historic errors. Therefore, I believe that the Gandhian method of nonviolence and truth, in addition to that, the modern social legislations can eradicate the social evils of our country, which are the main obstacles for the overall development of the country. After Gandhiji, no other national leaders of contemporary India has not made any sincere attempts to uphold the dignity of the socially suppressed people. The manual scavenging is another serious social evil which is existed even today. The urbanization is going on in a rapid manner. Millions and millions of people are migrating to the urban area without any basic amenities. They are living in slums. Slums are the most disadvantaged places to live on there. The manual scavenging is not eradicated even in spite of many attempts. The allocation for the eradication of this manual scavenging in the urban area, in the state and the national, the union government is very less. And the modern governments are not serious about this inhuman and the most heinous practice. because this is the occupation from the victimized people, and the no other people are taking this problem seriously. And it is the psychological and moral crisis of the society is responsible for that. For this occupation, only a few section of people, those who are historically and uh, economically exploited section, are even today engaging in this system. The manual scavenging was eradication of this problem was the priority of the Gandhian method, even in the freedom movement. Gandhiji has given attention for the sanitary system, for the spread of this hygienic practices among common man. Gandhi's movement was a mass movement. He educates the people by his attack. That's why the world famous leaders like the Abraham Lincoln, the other important personalities are influenced by Gandhiji, even for Obama and the other important world leaders. And whatever may be the present situation regarding this socio-economic evils, it is inevitable. The Gandhian method is only the available method to adapt by the exploited section of people. When we study the Dalit movements which are going on in the last 50 years to protect their constitutional right and the struggle against injustice and exploitation, they are following, even though they are influenced largely by Ambedkar, but they are following the Gandhian methods. There is no single violent incidents are reported in the struggle against injustice and exploitation in the present context. But still, in many traditional states, in many parts of rural India, the atrocities on the women, the atrocities on the poor, the atrocities on the untouchables are going on in larger number. The central and the state governments are politically utilizing their own votes to gain power, but with regard to the social reformations, the modern governments are not taking any serious, thought, urgency regarding this problem. India may be civilized, India may be adapted to all other modern technology and other things. Unless and until the social reformations is going on in a systematic manner to uphold the fundamental civil rights and dignity of the common man, that too in a larger scale of population, the country will not develop sustainably. Therefore, I humbly believe in my reading and my observation that Gandhian method, that too the mass awakening programs, educating people in a scientific manner and moral consciousness, and to adapt the legislative method for the eradication of the social problem is the urgent need of the hour. The Gandhian principles and Gandhian method and Gandhian thought is very useful in this regulation against this social evil. By quoting Gandhi, I will conclude my speech. In his return to India, Gandhiji was highly disappointed to know the illness of the people in the rural area, and he was very disappointed and depressed. The Britishers was not in a capacity to spread the education equally to all the people of the country. That is why he advises followers to follow the modern principles, to follow the social reformative methods, and to adapt it to the constitution. for the eradication and reduction of this problem. But still, in spite of many rules and regulations, in spite of many social education, these problems are not completely eradicated. In different form, these problems are still prevailing in the rural area. It is the responsibility of the modern government, the center and the state to address this problem as early as possible. Thank you so much. Hello. Hello.
Thank you, sir. ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ ಸರ್?
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಸರ್?
ಈಗ ನಾನು ಕ್ವಿಕ್ ಆಗಿ ಸಮರೈಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಕ್ವೆಶ್ಚನ್ಸ್ ತಗೊಳ್ಳಿ ಆಡಿಯನ್ಸ್ ನಿಂದ. Thank you, sir, for the wonderful talk. Professor Rudraswamy has focused on how Gandhi's passive resistance, non-violence, moral and spiritual awakening are crucial even today. And he also pointed out that these were also crucial things through which the Western world fought racism. He also focuses on how Gandhiji used his South African experience to fight caste system in India. And he brings out in his talk how Gandhian thoughts are important to root out untouchability in India. He also points out the fashion in which Ambedkar and Gandhi used different methods for social transformation of India. In spite of, he bemoans that in spite of technological advancement and social change is still, not that significant, and the social injustice is still prevalent in both rural and urban spaces in India as well as other places. And he also brings out a very important issue like the exploitation of child labor and gender inequality in his talk, and shows how Gandhian methods are very crucial to fight out such social evils too. And he also draws our attention to the age-old traditions and superstitions which are still in operation in India, and how these age-old superstitions and traditions are a great hindrance for progress of India. And he is of the view that Gandhiji's thoughts are very much important for the modern world, and he also is at pains to point out that most of the modern governments have not focused on social reforms and have not cared to look for the dignity of the common man and to preserve the dignity of the common man. Now, these are some of the important points which Professor Rudraswamy has raised in his talk. And I request the participants, if you have any questions, queries, observations to make, please go ahead, and Professor Rudraswamy will take your questions and answer them.
Okay. Any question from participants? Professor Rudraswamy?
ಏನಾದ್ರು ಬಾಕ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆಯಾ ನೋಡಿ.
ಬಂದು ಸರಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು.
ಓಕೆ,
ಪುಟ್ಟರಾಜು ಕಾಣ್ತಿದೆ ನಿಮಗೆ?
ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇದೆ.
ಓರಿ
Sir, there is one question from Dr. Veena Ravindra. She's asking whether Gandhiji would approve of non-violence against the atrocities on women in modern scenario.
Of course, Gandhi would accept the method, but it is the only available method for the woman also, I believe.
Okay.
The gender inequality can be addressed only by Gandhian methods.
No, she's actually asking how can non-violence be used to stop the atrocities against women.
We have to educate the women and the other people. We have to give the moral education, and we have to propagate the justice between the male and the female in a scientific manner. We have to educate the masses.
Okay.
Whole society.
Yes, yes. We have to educate the male and the female in a scientific manner.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Next ಹೋಗಿ ಇನ್ನೊಂದಿದೆ.
Next question.
ಕೆಳಗೆ ಬನ್ನಿ. How can ಅದಲ್ಲ ಮೇಲೋಗಿ ಇನ್ನು ಅದೇ
question ಯಾರ್ದಪ್ಪ?
This is from Pawan Kumar. Pawan Kumar is asking, how can we bring awareness to individuals about sustainable, that's an old question.
Jivan Kumar ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ.
Any more questions from the participants? You can unmute and ask questions. We still have time. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Are there any questions?
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello,
Please
sir.
introduce yourself.
Hello, sir. Padmaja Desai, sir. Chat box ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆ ನೋಡಿ sir. Question ಇದೆಲ್ಲ.
I see. Padmaja Desai. ನೋಡಿ.
Now you can ask questions. Kedi.
Yes. Padmaja Desai.
ಇನ್ನು ಕೆಳಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು. Questions ಕಾಣ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅವನಿಗೆ. Questions ಕೇಳಿ ಪದ್ಮಜಾ.
ಪದ್ಮಜಾ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವರೇ, ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿ ಪದ್ಮಜಾ ಮೇಡಮ್.
ಏನ್ ಕೂಗಿದ್ರು ಅಷ್ಟೇ, ಕೂಗ್ಬಿಡಿ ಯಾಕೆ.
ಹಲೋ.
ಕೇಳಿ.
ಹಲೋ ಸರ್.
ಹಲೋ ಸರ್.
ಸರ್ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿ ಅವರು ಫ್ರೀಡಮ್ ಮೂವ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಲೀಡರ್ ಆಗಿದ್ರು ಸರಿ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಈ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಇವಿಲ್ಸ್ ಏನಿದಾವೆ ಅವನ್ನ ಇರಾಡಿಕೇಶನ್ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಇಸಮ್ ಅನ್ನ ಅವ್ರು ಬಳಸಿದ್ರು ಅಂತ, ಯಾವ ಇಸಮ್ ಅನ್ನ ಬಳಸಿದ್ರು ಅವರು ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಇರಾಡಿಕೇಶನ್ಗೆ? ಈ ಲಿಂಗ ತಾರತಮ್ಯ ಇರ್ಲಿ, ಇನ್ನೊಂದಿರ್ಲಿ, ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಏನು ಮೌಢ್ಯಗಳಿದಾವಲ್ಲ, ಅವ್ನ್ ಬಳಸಕ್ಕೆ ಅವ್ನ ಇರಾಡಿಕೇಶನ್ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ಯಾವ ಇಸಮ್ ಬಳಸಿದ್ರು ಅವರು?
ಜನರಲ್ಲಿ ನೈತಿಕ ಪ್ರಜ್ಞೆಯನ್ನ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಅವ್ರು ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ನಡೆ ಮತ್ತು ನುಡಿಯಿಂದ ಜನರಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾರಲ್ ಕಾನ್ಸಿಯಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಅಂತಾರಲ್ಲ, ಅದನ್ನ ಅವರು ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಸಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು.
ಹಲೋ ಸರ್.
ಸರ್
ಜೋರ ಮಾತಾಡಿ.
ಹಲೋ,
ಅದು ಕೇಳ್ತೇವೆ ಸರ್.
ಕೇಳ್ತೀರಿ ಸರ್?
ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಅದೇ ಅವರು ಈ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಈವಿಲ್ಸ್ ಎರಾಡಿಕೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಎಜುಕೇಶನ್ ಅನ್ನ ಮಾರಲ್ ಎಜುಕೇಶನ್ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಹಲೋ ಸರ್.
Sir, he is answering the question. You please wait for your turn. Okay?
Hello,
please. Wait. He is answering to a question.
ಹೇಳಿ ಸರ್, ಹೇಳಿ.
No, ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ನೀವು ಮಾತಾಡಿ,
ಉತ್ತರ ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಡಿ.
ಅವರು ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಅನಿಷ್ಟಗಳನ್ನು ಹೋಗಲಾಡಿಸ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾರಲ್ ಎಜುಕೇಶನ್ ಮತ್ತು ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಆಬ್ಲಿಗೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಜನರ ಮೇಲೆ ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಬಯಸಿದ್ರು.
ಕೇಳಿ, ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಕೇಳಿ. ಹಲೋ, ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ರೈಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಕೇಳಿ
ಸರ್. Good afternoon, sir.
Okay.
So my name is Dr. Ramappa from K.R. Bella's Arts and Commerce College, Mundargi, PG Center, PG Studies in Economics, Mundargi. Sir, my question. Today, number of the people, but not properly follow up the Gandhian moral principles.
Yes.
So it is right or wrong thing, sir?
It's wrong.
Wrong, sir.
It's clearly wrong thing.
Yes, yes, sir.
But clearly wrong. Okay.
ನೀವು ಎರಡೇ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರಿ, ಅದು ಸರಿ ತಪ್ಪು ಅಂತ. ತಪ್ಪು
ತಪ್ಪು ತಪ್ಪು. ಡೆಫಿನೆಟ್ಲಿ.
How it is?
How it is means
ಅಲ್ರಿ ತಪ್ಪು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ತಪ್ಪು, ಅವು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಹೇಗೆ ನೀವ್ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ.
it's an ancient, it's a old prejudices will not be eradicated easily. Our people are still in the prison of prejudice, stereotyped opinions. Then it will take the time to understand the significance of equality. The prejudice and stereotyped opinions cannot be easily eradicated.
Okay, Mundarige.
Okay, okay, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
yes, sir. Are there any more questions? Are there any more questions
from participants? ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಜನ ಇದಾರಲ್ಲ ಸರ್. ಹೌದಾ? ಹೊರಟೋಗ್ರ? ಇಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
Okay, if there are no questions, we will conclude.
ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಪ್ಲೀಸ್. ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಟೈಮ್ ಇದೆ.
ಸರ್ ನಮಸ್ತೆ.
ನಮಸ್ತೆ ಸರ್.
ನಾನು ಹಾಸನದ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಕಾಲೇಜಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿ ಆಗಿದ್ದೆ ಸರ್.
ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಿದ್ರು.
ನೋಡಿ ಸಂತೋಷ ಆಯ್ತು ಸರ್. ಎಷ್ಟೋ ವರ್ಷದ ತರುವಾಯ ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನ ನೋಡಿ ತುಂಬಾ ಆನಂದ ಆಯ್ತು. ಹೇಳಿ ಸರ್.
ನಮ್ ಶೇಖರ್ ಕಾರಣ, ಶೇಖರ್ ನನಗೆ ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ನನಗೆ ರೂಢಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅಪ್ಡೇಟ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ.
ಸೀನಿಯರ್ ಸರ್.
ಹೇಳಿ ಸರ್, ಹೇಳಿ.
ಮೌಢ್ಯ ಮತ್ತು ಸಂಪ್ರದಾಯಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟ ಹಾಗೆ ಸರ್.
ಹೌದು ಸರ್.
ನೀವು ಕೊನೆಯ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ವಿಸ್ತೃತವಾಗಿ ವಿವರಿಸಿದ್ರಿ. ಇದು ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯ ತತ್ವದಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬಾ ದ್ವಂದ್ವ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಓದಿದ್ದೇನೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದ್ರೆ ರೋಗಗಳು ಬಂದಾಗ ಆಸ್ಪತ್ರೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಡಿ, ರಾಮ ಅನ್ನಿ, ಆಸ್ಪತ್ರೆ ಬೇಡ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದವರು ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಇಡೀ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾರಿಗೆ ಸಂಪರ್ಕ, ರೈಲು ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಬೇಡ, ಇವು ಸ್ವಚ್ಛತೆಯ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕಾಗಿಯೋ ಅಥವಾ ನಗರೀಕರಣದ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕಾಗಿಯೋ ಅವತ್ತು ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು. ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯ ಪ್ರತಿಪಾದನೆಯಲ್ಲೇನೆ ಈ ಮೌಢ್ಯ ಮತ್ತು ಸಂಪ್ರದಾಯಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ರೀತಿಯ ಬೆಂಬಲ ಸಿಗ್ಬಿಡುತ್ತಲ್ಲ ಸರ್, ಅದನ್ನ ಹೇಗೆ ನಾವು?
ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅವರು ಬಿಗಿನಿಂಗ್ ಆತರ ಹೇಳಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಬಟ್ ಇಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಹಿಸ್ ಒಪಿನಿಯನ್ ಇನ್ ದಿ ಲೇಟರ್ ಸ್ಟೇಜ್. ಅವರು ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿ ಬಹಳ ವೈಜ್ಞಾನಿಕವಾಗಿ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತಂತ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ. ನಮ್ದೇ ದಿ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿ ವಾಸ್ ಸೈಂಟಿಫಿಕ್ ಇನ್ ಟೆಂಪರ್ಮೆಂಟ್, but your opinion is very in the preliminary stage of his life. In the last stage of his life, after 42, 43, 1943, 44, he has changed his feelings. He has changed his thoughts on caste system, superstitions and other things. He is in favor of scientific temperament. Gandhi was in favor of scientific approach for many things. ನೀವು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು ಅದು ಬಹಳ ಹಿಂದಿನ ಅವರ ಪ್ರಾಥಮಿಕ ಹಂತದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದ ಮಾತುಗಳು. ಆದ್ರೆ ಕೊನೆಯ ಹಂತದಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿ ವೈಜ್ಞಾನಿಕ ವಿಚಾರಗಳನ್ನ ಒಪ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ರು. ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಕಾಲಮಾನಗಳಿಗೆ ತಕ್ಕಂತೆ ನಾವು ಅದನ್ನ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿ ಪಡಿಸಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ನನ್ನ ಭಾವನೆ.
ಈಗ ಸರ್ ಮೇಷ್ಟ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ ಉತ್ತರಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ಕಿರಣ್ ಅವರು ಪ್ರಸ್ತಾಪ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಬಹಳ ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತವಾಗಿ ಇತ್ತು ಸರ್. ಆದ್ರೆ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯವರ ಕೊನೆ ಘಟ್ಟ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯವರ ಜೀವನದ ಕೊನೆ ಘಟ್ಟ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಆಗಿ ನಾವು ಓದ್ಕೊಂಡಂಗೆ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯವರು ಈ ಮೊದಲು ಸರಳ ಮದುವೆಗೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಹೋಗ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಿದ್ರು. ಸಿಂಪಲ್ ಮ್ಯಾರೇಜ್ ಮಾತ್ರ ಹೋಗ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯವರು ಹೇಳ್ತಿದ್ರು. 42 ನಂತರ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯವರ ಬದುಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಕೋನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಚಿಂತನೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯವರು ಆಮೂಲಾಗ್ರವಾದ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಗೆ ಚಿಂತನೆಗೆ ಮುಖ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಎಷ್ಟು ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಆಗಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರಂದ್ರೆ, ಅವ್ರು ಯಾರೇ ಮದುವೆಗೆ ಇನ್ವೈಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಮದುವೆ ಆಗುವ ಹುಡುಗ ಅಥವಾ ಹುಡುಗಿ ಕಡ್ಡಾಯವಾಗಿ ಶೆಡ್ಯೂಲ್ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕು, ಹರಿಜನರ ಹುಡುಗ ಅಥವಾ ಹುಡುಗಿ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕು, ಅಂತ ಮದುವೆಗೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ನಾನು ಹೋಗ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯವರು ಕೊನೆ 42 ನಂತರ ಪ್ರತಿಪಾದಿಸ್ತಾರೆ. ಯಾವುದೇ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ ಬದಲಾಗುವಂತ ಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಆ ಬದಲಾಗುವಂತದ್ದು ಪ್ರಕ್ರಿಯೆ ಅದು ಕೊನೆ ತಡವಾಗಿ ಆದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ಗಾಂಧಿಜಿಯವ್ರಿಗೆ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದೇ ಒಂದು ಗುಣಾತ್ಮಕ ಅಂತ. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಸರಳ ಮದುವೆ ಅಂತಿದ್ದವರು ಕೊನೆಗೆ ಮದುವೆ ಆಗ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಹುಡುಗ ಹುಡುಗಿ ಕಡ್ಡಾಯವಾಗಿ ಹರಿಜನ ಹುಡುಗ ಹುಡುಗಿ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಈ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯವರ ಆಲೋಚನೆ. ಬಹುಶಃ ಅಂತ ಕೊನೆ ಘಟ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಮಾಗುವಿಕೆ, ಯಾವುದೇ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬ ಜೀವ ಕೂಡ ರಕ್ತ ಮಾಂಸ ತುಂಬಿದ ಮನುಷ್ಯನ ಆಗಿದ್ದ ಕಾರಣ ಕೊನೆಗೆ ಅವ್ರು ಪಕ್ವವಾದಂತ ಗಾಂಧಿ, ಮಾಗಿದಂತ ಗಾಂಧಿಗೆ ಅನಿಸಿತ್ತು ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಗೆ ಗುಣಾತ್ಮಕ ತಗೊಳ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ. ಇದು ಬಹುಶಃ ಹೇಳಿ ಸರ್.
Gandhiji was learning everything from every day, and he was an endless, growing personality. He learns the new lessons from day-to-day developments. Gandhiji has radically changed in his last stage of his life. Your argument is correct.
Okay. ಕೇಳ ಕವಿ
ಸರ್ ನಮಸ್ತೆ.
ನಮಸ್ತೆ.
ನನ್ನ ಹೆಸರು ಪ್ರವೀಣ್ ಅಂತ. ನನ್ನ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಸರ್, ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತ ಶತಮಾನದಲ್ಲಿ ಇಡೀ ವಿಶ್ವದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ನ್ಯಾಯವಾಗಿ ದೌರ್ಜನ್ಯಗಳು, ಗಲಭೆಗಳು ಹೆಚ್ಚುತ್ತಿರುವ ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಬಾಂಗ್ಲಾದೇಶ ಆಗಲಿ ಇಡೀ ವಿಶ್ವದಲ್ಲಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಮೊನ್ನೆ ನಾನು ಕೆಲವು ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಪೇಪರ್ಗಳನ್ನ ಮತ್ತು ಘಟನೆಗಳನ್ನ ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಬಾಂಗ್ಲಾದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಮುಸ್ಲಿಮರ ಅಲ್ಪಸಂಖ್ಯಾತ ಸಮುದಾಯ, ರೋಹಿಂಗ್ಯಾ ಸಮುದಾಯ ಆ ದೇಶದ ನೆಲದಲ್ಲೇ ಇವತ್ತು ನಿಕೃಷ್ಟವಾಗಿ ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಮತ್ತು ಕಳೆದ 10 ವರ್ಷಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ಸಮುದಾಯದ ನಾಯಕ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿ ಅಂತ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಹುಟ್ಟಿದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಬೇರೆ ಕಥೆನೇ ಆಗ್ತಿತ್ತು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕಳೆದ 50 ವರ್ಷಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕಳೆದ 60 ವರ್ಷ ಜೈಲಲ್ಲೇ ಜೀವನ ಕಳೀತಾರೆ. ಅವರು ಕೊನೆವರೆಗೂ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ನಾನು ಕೊನೆ ಜೀವನ ಸಾಯೋವರೆಗೂ ರೋಲ್ ಮಾಡಲ್ ಗಾಂಧಿಯಲ್ಲೇ ನಾನು ಚಳವಳಿ ಅರ್ಥ ಇದೆ, ಉತ್ಸಾಹ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಆದ್ರೆ ವಿಪರ್ಯಾಸವಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಂಧಿಯನ್ನೇ ಒಂದು ಆರೋಪ ಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡೋ ಇವತ್ತು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ತಾವುಗಳು ಒಂದು ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಮೌಲ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಅಂಶಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಿ. ಈ ನಿಟ್ಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಅಭಿಪ್ರಾಯ ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ?
ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿ ಜವಾಬ್ದಾರಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಕಾಲಮಾನದ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿ. ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿಯವರನ್ನ ಆಧುನಿಕ ಭಾರತ ನಿರ್ಲಕ್ಷ್ಯ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ಅವ್ರು ಏನ್ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆ, ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ದಿ ಎರರ್ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟ್ ಲೀಡರ್ಶಿಪ್. Gandhiji is not responsible for the moral regulation of the present situation in India. It is left to the people to accept this principle or not. It depends upon their education, their moral consciousness, and the principles in which they believe.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರೆ.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you so much, sir.
Dr. Shekhar has forced me to express my feelings.
No. It's wonderful meeting you. It's wonderful listening to you.
I am very grateful to the Gandhian Pita and for the English department.
It's a pleasure to have you, sir, always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And I also thank the participants of today's webinar. And we'll have 4 plenary talks tomorrow. We will start at 10:30. So these are the talks. I'm sure you already have the schedule with you. For tomorrow at 10:30, we have Muzaffar Asadi, Professor Muzaffar Asadi, talking to us about Gandhi and contemporary world. And at 11:45, we have Dr. Sudarshan Iyengar, who is talking about decentralized economy for sustainable development. Then at 12:45, we have Sridhar Balagar, Gandhiji's imaginary village and its reality is his topic. And at 2:45, we have Dr. Anupam R. Nagar from Porbandar, talking about critiquing Gandhiji's Ashtanga Marg in contemporary times. And at 4:15, we have the valedictory. So please be with us for tomorrow and with your active participation as you have done today. Thank you so much for each one of you who have participated in this webinar. Have a nice day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
ಆಯ್ತಲ್ಲ ಮತ್ತೆ